Summary of the book Matilda by Roald Dahl. Matilda is a magical and funny story about a brilliant little girl with a big heart. She loves books and uses her intelligence to overcome challenges at school and home. This book teaches kids the power of kindness, courage, and standing up for what is right. Parents and children will enjoy reading it together and sharing its wonderful lessons. Let's explore Matilda's amazing world and discover the joy of reading. Chapter 1. The Reader of Books. In this chapter, we meet Matilda Wormwood, a very smart and special little girl. By the age of 3, Matilda teaches herself to read using newspapers and magazines at home. She is curious and loves learning new things. Matilda's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, do not care about her. They are mean and think Matilda is just an ordinary child. Mr. Wormwood is a dishonest car salesman, and Mrs. Wormwood spends her time playing bingo. They do not understand why Matilda loves books and think watching TV is better. When Matilda is 4 years old, she finds the public library. She goes there every day to read because her house has no books. The librarian, Mrs. Phelps, sees how much Matilda loves reading and helps her find new books. Matilda reads children's books first, then moves on to adult books by famous authors like Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. She understands and enjoys these stories, even though she is very young. Matilda's parents do not support her, but she does not give up. Books become her escape from her unhappy home life. Through reading, Matilda learns about the world and feels happy. This chapter shows how different Matilda is from her parents. Matilda is smart, curious, and loves learning, while her parents only care about money, TV, and bingo. Matilda's love for books makes her strong and independent, even when her parents are unkind. The Reader of Books teaches us that books are powerful. They can help us grow, learn, and find joy, even in difficult situations. Matilda's story inspires us to love reading and never give up on our dreams. 2. Mr. Wormwood, the Great Car Dealer. In the second chapter, we learn more about Matilda's father, Mr. Wormwood. He is a dishonest man who owns a car dealership. He sells second-hand cars, but he cheats his customers to make more money. Mr. Wormwood uses tricks to make old, broken cars look new. For example, he puts sawdust in the engines to make them run quietly for a short time. He also turns back the mileage on the cars to make it seem like they have been driven less. These tricks fool his customers, and they buy the cars, not knowing they are bad. Mr. Wormwood is proud of his cheating and thinks he is very clever. He even brags about his tricks to his family at dinner. Matilda, who is much smarter and kinder than her father, knows that what he is doing is wrong. She feels angry about his dishonesty, but keeps quiet because her parents do not listen to her. This chapter shows how different Matilda is from her father. Mr. Wormwood only cares about money and does not think about how his actions hurt others. Matilda, on the other hand, values honesty and fairness. The chapter also shows how Matilda is treated unfairly at home. Mr. Wormwood often calls her mean names and does not respect her intelligence. Even though her parents are unkind, Matilda stays strong and does not let them change who she is. Mr. Wormwood, the Great Car Dealer, helps us understand Matilda's difficult home life and her father's dishonest behavior. It also shows Matilda's strength and sense of justice, which will become important later in the story. Chapter 3. The Hat and the Superglue. In this chapter, Matilda decides to play a trick on her father, Mr. Wormwood, to teach him a lesson for being mean and dishonest. Mr. Wormwood often insults Matilda and brags about his cheating ways as a car dealer, which makes Matilda angry. One day, Matilda sees her father's favorite hat, which he wears to work every day. She gets an idea for a prank. Matilda carefully puts strong superglue inside the hat and places it back where her father keeps it. The next morning, Mr. Wormwood puts on the hat without noticing the glue. When it is time to take it off, he realizes it is stuck to his head. He pulls and pulls, but the hat will not come off. At breakfast, the family tries to help Mr. Wormwood. Mrs. Wormwood suggests soaking the hat in water, and Matilda's brother laughs at their father's struggle. Matilda, however, stays quiet and pretends she knows nothing about the prank. Later, Mr. Wormwood goes to work with the hat still glued to his head. Everyone at the car dealership laughs at him, and he feels embarrassed. The prank is a small victory for Matilda, who feels satisfied that her father has been punished for his bad behavior. This chapter shows Matilda's cleverness and her ability to stand up to her father in her own way. Even though she is small and treated unfairly, she uses her intelligence to fight back without being caught. The Hat and the Superglue is a funny and light-hearted chapter that highlights Matilda's creativity and sense of justice. It also shows how she deals with her difficult home life in a smart and playful way. Chapter 4. The Ghost. In the chapter The Ghost, Matilda plays another clever trick on her family, this time on her mean and selfish father, Mr. Wormwood. Matilda wants to teach him a lesson for always being rude and dishonest. One evening, Mr. Wormwood comes home from work and brags about how he cheated his customers at the car dealership. Matilda feels angry but doesn't argue with him. Instead, she thinks of a plan to scare him. The next day, while her family is busy, Matilda sneaks into the bathroom and finds her mother's platinum blonde hair dye. She takes a small amount of the dye and mixes it with her father's bottle of hair tonic. She knows that Mr. Wormwood uses a tonic every morning to keep his hair looking neat. The following morning, Mr. Wormwood puts the hair tonic on his head as usual, not realizing it has been mixed with the dye. Later, when he looks in the mirror, he is shocked to see that his hair has turned bright silver. He thinks something strange and scary has happened to him. Matilda acts innocent and suggests that it might be a ghost or a supernatural event. Her father becomes very nervous and confused. He doesn't know how to explain what happened and feels embarrassed. This prank is another example of Matilda's intelligence and creativity. Even though she is small and treated badly by her parents, she finds clever ways to stand up for herself. The Ghost is a funny and entertaining chapter that shows Matilda's playful side. It also highlights the differences between her and her parents. Matilda is smart and resourceful, while her father is dishonest and foolish. This chapter adds humor and excitement to the story. Chapter 5. Arithmetic. In this chapter, Matilda shows her amazing intelligence once again. This time, she impresses her family with her incredible math skills, but instead of being proud of her, they ignore or insult her. One evening, during dinner, Mr. Wormwood brags about how much money he made by cheating his customers at the car dealership. He talks about selling cars for big profits, and Matilda listens carefully. She quickly calculates the exact amount of money her father earned and points it out. Matilda's mental math surprises everyone because she is so young. She does not need a calculator or paper to solve the problem. However, instead of being impressed, Mr. Wormwood gets angry. He accuses Matilda of showing off and calls her names. Mrs. Wormwood and her brother Michael do not defend her. Matilda feels frustrated because her parents do not appreciate her intelligence. She knows they value money and television more than learning or kindness. Despite this, Matilda stays calm and does not let their words hurt her. This chapter highlights Matilda's extraordinary abilities and her parents' lack of understanding. It also shows the unfair way her family treats her, even when she does something remarkable. Matilda's love for learning and her ability to stay strong in difficult situations make her a unique and inspiring character. Arithmetic is an important chapter because it shows how Matilda is different from her family. While her parents focus on cheating and material things, Matilda values knowledge and fairness. This contrast helps readers admire Matilda's strength and intelligence, even though she faces challenges at home. The chapter also sets the stage for Matilda's later adventures, where her cleverness and determination will help her overcome bigger obstacles. Chapter 6. The Platinum-Blond Man. In this chapter, The Platinum-Blond Man, Matilda plays another clever trick on her father, Mr. Wormwood. She wants to teach him a lesson for being rude and dishonest. One day, Matilda hears her father bragging about cheating his customers at the car dealership. He lies about the condition of the cars to make more money. Matilda feels angry but does not argue with him. Instead, she thinks of a plan to get back at him. Matilda sneaks into the bathroom and finds her mother's bottle of platinum blonde hair dye. She carefully pours some of the dye into her father's bottle of hair tonic, which he uses every day. Matilda knows he will not notice the change. The next morning, Mr. Wormwood uses the hair tonic as usual. A few hours later, when he looks in the mirror, he is shocked to see that his hair has turned bright blonde. He does not understand what happened and starts to panic. When he shows his family, Mrs. Wormwood and Michael laugh at him. Matilda pretends she knows nothing and stays quiet, but inside, she feels satisfied. Mr. Wormwood is embarrassed and angry, but there is nothing he can do. This chapter shows Matilda's intelligence and her ability to stand up to her father in a creative way. Even though she is small and treated unfairly, she uses her cleverness to fight back without being caught. The Platinum-Blond Man is a funny and entertaining chapter that highlights the differences between Matilda and her father. While Mr. Wormwood is dishonest and foolish, Matilda is smart and resourceful. This prank is another example of how Matilda handles her difficult home life with humor and determination. Chapter 7. Miss Honey. Now we meet Matilda's teacher, Miss Jennifer Honey. She is kind, gentle, and very different from Matilda's rude and selfish parents. Miss Honey notices right away that Matilda is not an ordinary child. On the first day of school, Miss Honey gives her students simple tasks like reading and math. Matilda surprises her by reading advanced books and solving difficult math problems in her head. Miss Honey is amazed by Matilda's intelligence and realizes that she is a genius. Miss Honey feels worried because Matilda's talents are not being nurtured. She believes that a child like Matilda needs special attention and challenges to grow. Miss Honey decides to talk to the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, about moving Matilda to a higher class. However, Miss Trunchbull is a cruel and terrifying woman who does not care about the students. She refuses to help Matilda and says that all children are horrible. Miss Honey feels frustrated but does not give up. Miss Honey also visits Matilda's parents to tell them how smart their daughter is. She hopes they will support Matilda's education, but they do not care. They are more interested in watching TV and making money. They even insult Miss Honey and say that Matilda is a troublemaker. This chapter shows the beginning of the special relationship between Matilda and Miss Honey. Miss Honey is the first adult to recognize Matilda's brilliance and to care about her well-being. Miss Honey is an important chapter because it introduces a character who will play a big role in Matilda's life. It also highlights the contrast between Miss Honey's kindness and the unfair treatment Matilda receives from her parents and Miss Trunchbull. Chapter 8. The Trunchbull. In this chapter, we learn about Miss Trunchbull, the headmistress of Matilda's school. Miss Trunchbull is a terrifying woman who hates children. She is very tall, strong, and always angry. She believes all kids are bad and deserves to be punished. Miss Trunchbull is very cruel. She does not just scold students. She hurts them. She throws kids across the playground, locks them in a dark, scary cupboard called the Chokey, and yells at them all the time. The students are very scared of her, and even the teachers try to avoid her. Miss Honey, Matilda's kind teacher, tries to protect her students from Miss Trunchbull. However, Miss Honey is also afraid of the headmistress and cannot stop her cruel behavior. Matilda learns about Miss Trunchbull from her classmates. They tell her stories about how the headmistress punishes kids in terrible ways. One story is about a boy who ate a piece of cake without permission. Miss Trunchbull forced him to eat a giant chocolate cake in front of everyone until he felt sick. Despite being scared, Matilda feels angry about how Miss Trunchbull treats the students. She thinks it is unfair and starts to plan ways to fight back. This chapter shows the contrast between Miss Trunchbull's cruelty and Miss Honey's kindness. It also highlights Matilda's sense of justice and her bravery. Even though Miss Trunchbull is very powerful, Matilda is determined to stand up to her. The Trunchbull is an important chapter because it introduces the main villain of the story. It sets the stage for the conflict between Matilda and Miss Trunchbull, which becomes a key part of the book. Chapter 9, The Parents. In the chapter The Parents, we learn more about Matilda's family and how badly they treat her. Matilda's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, are selfish, rude, and completely uninterested in their daughter. They do not understand how special and intelligent Matilda is. Mr. Wormwood works as a car dealer, but he is dishonest and cheats his customers to make money. He brags about his tricks and thinks he is very clever. Mrs. Wormwood spends most of her time watching TV and playing bingo. Neither of them cares about education or books, and they think Matilda is strange for loving to read. Matilda tries to share her love of books with her parents, but they only insult her. They tell her that watching TV is better than reading, and that she should stop wasting her time. Mr. Wormwood even calls her stupid, even though Matilda is actually a genius. Despite their unkindness, Matilda does not let her parents' words bring her down. She knows she is different from them and dreams of a better life. She continues to read books and teach herself new things. This chapter shows how Matilda's parents are the opposite of her. While they are dishonest and lazy, Matilda is honest, hardworking, and loves learning. The unfair treatment she receives from her parents makes readers feel sympathy for her and admire her strength. The Parents is an important chapter because it explains why Matilda feels so alone and unappreciated at home. It also shows how she uses her intelligence and creativity to rise above her difficult situation. Matilda's resilience and determination make her a truly inspiring character, even when faced with unkind and unfair parents. Chapter 10. Throwing the Hammer. In this chapter, we learn more about Miss Trunchbull, the scary headmistress of Matilda's school. Miss Trunchbull used to be an athlete who competed in hammer throwing, a sport where you throw a heavy ball attached to a chain. She was very strong and powerful, and she still uses her strength to scare and hurt the children at school. Miss Trunchbull believes that children are annoying and deserve to be punished for even the smallest mistakes. She often grabs them by their arms or hair and throws them across the playground, just like she used to throw the hammer in her competitions. The children are terrified of her and try to avoid making her angry. In this chapter, we see how cruel and unfair Miss Trunchbull is. She does not care about teaching or helping the students. She only wants to control them through fear. The children feel helpless because Miss Trunchbull is so strong and mean. Matilda listens to the stories her classmates tell about Miss Trunchbull's punishments. Instead of feeling scared, Matilda starts to think about how unfair the headmistress is and wonders if there is a way to stop her. This chapter helps us understand why Miss Trunchbull is so feared by everyone at the school. It also shows Matilda's growing sense of justice. Even though she is small and young, Matilda begins to think about standing up to Miss Trunchbull's bullying. Throwing the Hammer is an important chapter because it highlights the conflict between Miss Trunchbull and the students. It also shows how Matilda's cleverness and courage make her different from the other children, who are too afraid to fight back. This sets the stage for Matilda's future actions against Miss Trunchbull. Chapter 11. Bruce Bogtrotter and the Cake. In this chapter, Miss Trunchbull, the cruel headmistress, punishes a boy named Bruce Bogtrotter in front of the entire school. Bruce is a student who loves food, and Miss Trunchbull accuses him of stealing a slice of her chocolate cake. To punish him, Miss Trunchbull makes Bruce eat a giant chocolate cake all by himself in front of everyone. The cake is huge, and the punishment is meant to humiliate him and make him sick. Miss Trunchbull thinks Bruce will give up or cry, but Bruce surprises everyone. At first, Bruce struggles to eat the cake because it is so big, but he keeps going. The other students watch nervously, hoping he can finish it. Slowly, Bruce eats more and more of the cake. When he finally eats the last bite, the students cheer loudly. Bruce wins, and Miss Trunchbull is furious. This moment is important because it shows that Miss Trunchbull's punishments do not always work. Bruce's determination and the student support give them a small victory against Miss Trunchbull's cruelty. Matilda is inspired by Bruce's bravery. She sees that even though Miss Trunchbull is powerful and scary, she can be defeated. This event strengthens Matilda's resolve to stand up to the headmistress in her own way. Bruce Bogtrotter and the Cake is a memorable chapter because it highlights the cruelty of Miss Trunchbull and the courage of the students. It also shows how small acts of defiance, like Bruce finishing the cake, can bring hope and unity to the children. This chapter sets the tone for the bigger challenges that Matilda and her classmates will face later in the story. Chapter 12. Lavender. In the chapter Lavender, we learn more about Lavender, one of Matilda's classmates and closest friends. Lavender is small, brave, and full of confidence. She admires Matilda for her intelligence and cleverness and wants to prove that she can be just as daring. Miss Trunchbull, the mean headmistress, has a strict rule. She visits each class once a week to check on the students. During her visit, she looks for reasons to punish the children. The students are always nervous when it is their turn to have Miss Trunchbull in the classroom. One day, Miss Honey announces that it is their class's turn to host Miss Trunchbull. She asks for a volunteer to bring a glass of water for the headmistress during her visit. Lavender quickly raises her hand and gets a job. Lavender decides to play a trick on Miss Trunchbull. She goes to the pond near her house and catches a small newt, a kind of lizard. She carefully places the newt in the jug of water that she will give to Miss Trunchbull. Lavender feels excited and proud of her clever plan. When Miss Trunchbull arrives in the classroom, the students are scared, but Lavender feels confident. She knows her prank will surprise everyone. This chapter shows Lavender's adventurous and mischievous personality. She is not afraid of Miss Trunchbull and wants to stand up to her in her own way. Lavender's friendship with Matilda is also important because they both share a sense of courage and creativity. Lavender is a fun and exciting chapter that sets up an important event in the story. Lavender's prank with the newt will lead to a dramatic and memorable moment during Miss Trunchbull's visit to the classroom. Chapter 13. The Weekly Test. In this chapter, Miss Trunchbull visits Matilda's class for her regular inspection. This is a terrifying event for the students because Miss Trunchbull always looks for reasons to punish them. She makes them feel nervous and scared. Miss Trunchbull starts by testing the students with difficult questions. She picks on them randomly, hoping to catch them making mistakes. She enjoys yelling at the children and making them feel small. The students are afraid to speak because they know Miss Trunchbull might punish them even if they try their best. During the inspection, Miss Trunchbull asks a boy named Nigel to spell a word. When he struggles, she insults him and makes him feel embarrassed. Then she moves on to another student, asking tricky math questions. Miss Trunchbull does not care about helping the students learn. She only wants to show her power. While all of this is happening, Lavender is waiting for her prank to work. She had secretly placed a newt in the jug of water meant for Miss Trunchbull. When Miss Trunchbull pours herself a glass of water and sees the newt, she screams and jumps in shock. The students are surprised and try not to laugh. Miss Trunchbull becomes furious and blames Matilda for the prank, even though she had nothing to do with it. Matilda feels angry at the unfairness but does not argue. Instead, she discovers something strange. She can move objects with her mind. This is the first time Matilda realizes she has a special power. The weekly test is an exciting chapter that shows Miss Trunchbull's cruelty and Matilda's growing strength. Lavender's prank and Matilda's discovery of her powers set the stage for the big changes that will happen later in the story. Chapter 14, The First Miracle. In the Chapter 14, Matilda discovers something amazing about herself. During Miss Trunchbull's visit to the classroom, Matilda feels very angry because the headmistress accuses her of putting a newt in the water jug. Matilda did not do it, but Miss Trunchbull blames her unfairly and shouts at her in front of everyone. As Matilda sits at her desk, she feels her anger growing stronger. Suddenly, she realizes she can focus her energy and move things with her mind. She stares at the glass of water on Miss Trunchbull's desk and concentrates hard. To her surprise, the glass begins to wobble and then tips over, spilling water all over Miss Trunchbull. The newt in the water lands on Miss Trunchbull, and she screams and jumps around the classroom. The students are shocked, but secretly happy to see the cruel headmistress embarrassed. Miss Trunchbull storms out of the room, furious and dripping wet. Matilda is amazed by what she has done. She realizes she has a special power that no one else knows about. She feels excited, but also a little nervous about her new ability. She decides to keep it a secret for now and figure out how to use it. This chapter is very important because it shows Matilda's first use of her telekinetic powers. It marks a turning point in the story, as Matilda begins to understand her own strength and how she can stand up to people like Miss Trunchbull. The First Miracle is a thrilling and empowering chapter that highlights Matilda's courage and intelligence. It gives readers hope that she will find a way to fight against the unfairness and cruelty in her life. Chapter 15, The Second Miracle. In this chapter, Matilda starts to explore her new power. After discovering she can move objects with her mind, she practices at home to make her ability stronger. She uses her eyes to focus on small objects, like a pencil or a piece of bread, and makes them move without touching them. Each time she practices, she gets better and more confident. Matilda feels excited about her special power. She knows it is something unique and magical, and she starts to think about how she can use it to help others. She also realizes that her power gives her the ability to fight back against unfairness, especially against people like Miss Trunchbull. One day, Matilda tells Miss Honey about her power. Miss Honey is shocked and amazed when Matilda demonstrates it by moving a glass across the table. At first, Miss Honey cannot believe what she is seeing, but she quickly understands that Matilda is truly extraordinary. Miss Honey is kind and supportive. She listens to Matilda and encourages her to keep practicing her power. Miss Honey also tells Matilda that she is very special and that her intelligence and abilities make her different from other children. This chapter is important because it shows Matilda gaining control over her telekinetic power and sharing her secret with someone she trusts. It also strengthens the bond between Matilda and Miss Honey, who becomes an important ally in Matilda's life. The second miracle is a hopeful and inspiring chapter that highlights Matilda's growth and determination. It sets the stage for her to use her power in creative and clever ways to stand up to Miss Trunchbull and bring justice to her world. Chapter 16. Miss Honey's Cottage. In the chapter Miss Honey's Cottage, Matilda visits Miss Honey's house for the first time. Miss Honey is Matilda's kind and caring teacher, and Matilda has started to trust her. Miss Honey invites Matilda to her small cottage, which is very different from the big, fancy house where Matilda's parents live. When they arrive, Matilda notices that Miss Honey's house is simple and humble. It is small and cozy, but it feels warm and welcoming. Miss Honey is very kind to Matilda and makes her feel comfortable. They sit down together, and Miss Honey tells Matilda about her life. Miss Honey shares some sad stories about her past. She explains that she grew up with a very cruel aunt, who is actually Miss Trunchbull. Miss Trunchbull took away Miss Honey's home and money when she was young, leaving Miss Honey to live in a small, poor cottage. Despite this, Miss Honey remains kind and gentle. Matilda feels sorry for Miss Honey and is surprised to learn that Miss Trunchbull is her aunt. Matilda also realizes that Miss Honey's kindness is even more special because of the difficult life she has had. This chapter is important because it shows more about Miss Honey's character and the difficult life she has lived. It also deepens the friendship between Matilda and Miss Honey. Matilda begins to understand that Miss Honey is not just a teacher. She is someone who has suffered but still remains kind and caring. Miss Honey's Cottage is a touching chapter that helps readers learn more about Miss Honey's past and her connection with Matilda. It also shows how important friendship and kindness are, even in difficult situations. Chapter 17. Miss Honey's Story. In this chapter, Matilda learns more about Miss Honey's difficult life. Miss Honey is her kind and caring teacher, and Matilda has started to trust her. Miss Honey invites Matilda to her cottage, where they sit down to talk. Miss Honey begins to tell Matilda about her childhood. She explains that her aunt, Miss Trunchbull, was very cruel to her when she was young. Miss Trunchbull took away everything Miss Honey had, including her house and money. Miss Honey had to live in a small, poor cottage instead of the big, beautiful house she used to have. Miss Honey tells Matilda how she was forced to live with Miss Trunchbull after her parents died. Miss Trunchbull treated her terribly, making her do all the hard work and taking away her money. Miss Honey had no choice but to live in fear of her aunt. As Miss Honey shares her story, Matilda feels sad and sorry for her teacher. She is surprised to learn that Miss Trunchbull is Miss Honey's aunt. Matilda realizes how much Miss Honey has suffered, but she also sees how strong and kind Miss Honey is despite her difficult life. This chapter is important because it shows how Miss Honey has been hurt by Miss Trunchbull's cruelty. It helps Matilda understand why Miss Honey is so kind and why she cares about Matilda. Miss Honey's story is a touching chapter that reveals Miss Honey's past and the hardships she faced. It also shows the strong bond between Matilda and Miss Honey, as Matilda begins to understand her teacher's pain and admire her strength. Chapter 18. The Names. In the chapter 18, Matilda's parents continue to treat her poorly. They do not understand how smart and special she is. Instead of being proud of her, they call her names and ignore her abilities. Matilda's father, Mr. Wormwood, is a mean and rude man. He thinks that Matilda is just a silly little girl who doesn't know anything. He even calls her names like stupid and silly. Matilda's mother, Mrs. Wormwood, is also not kind to her. She spends most of her time playing cards and watching television, and she doesn't pay attention to Matilda's achievements. She does not care that Matilda is very smart and can read difficult books. Mrs. Wormwood thinks Matilda should just be like other children and not be so clever. Matilda feels very sad because her parents do not appreciate her. She wishes they would understand her and be proud of her intelligence. But instead, they continue to treat her badly. They do not understand how smart and capable she is. In this chapter, Matilda realizes that her parents are not the people who will support her or help her grow. She begins to feel more alone, but she also starts to understand that she has to rely on herself. The Names is an important chapter because it shows how Matilda's parents treat her badly. It helps readers understand why Matilda feels so isolated and why she is different from other children. Despite the way her parents treat her, Matilda begins to discover her own strength and intelligence. This chapter sets the stage for Matilda to become more independent and to find people, like Miss Honey, who will support her. Chapter 19. The Practice. In this chapter, Matilda continues to explore her special ability to move things with her mind. After discovering her telekinetic powers, Matilda becomes more curious and excited about what she can do. She decides to practice using her power in different ways to get better at it. At home, Matilda starts by focusing on small objects like pencils and books. She concentrates very hard and uses her eyes to move them. The more she practices, the easier it becomes for her to control the objects. She is amazed at how much she can do with her mind. One day, Matilda decides to try something bigger. She focuses on a glass of water and, with all her concentration, makes it move across the table. This time, she does it without touching it, and she feels very proud of herself. She knows that her power is growing stronger. As Matilda practices, she realizes that her ability is not just a fun trick. It is something special that she can use to stand up to the unfairness in her life, especially with Miss Trunchbull. Matilda feels more confident in herself and her powers. This chapter is important because it shows Matilda practicing and improving her telekinetic powers. It also highlights her growing self-confidence and determination. She begins to see that her power is not just a gift, but a way to fight back against the people who treat her badly. The practice is a key chapter that helps Matilda understand her abilities and sets the stage for her to use them to change her life. It shows her growing strength and independence, which will help her in the challenges ahead. Chapter 20. The Third Miracle. In the Chapter 20, Matilda's telekinetic powers continue to grow stronger. After practicing and learning to control her abilities, she decides to try something even more challenging. She wants to see if she can move a bigger object using only her mind. One day, Matilda is at school, and Miss Trunchbull is being especially cruel to the students. She is yelling at them and treating them unfairly. Matilda feels very angry at Miss Trunchbull and decides it is time to use her powers to stand up to her. Matilda focuses all her energy on a piece of chalk that is sitting on the teacher's desk. She concentrates very hard and, to her amazement, the chalk begins to move. Slowly, it floats up into the air and writes a message on the blackboard. The message says, Agatha, which is Miss Trunchbull's first name. The students in the class are shocked and amazed to see this happen. They cannot believe their eyes. Miss Trunchbull, however, is terrified when she sees the message on the board. She thinks the chalk is moving by itself, and she becomes very scared. This is Matilda's third miracle, and it shows how powerful her abilities have become. It also demonstrates her courage in using her powers to fight back against the unfairness of Miss Trunchbull. The third miracle is an exciting and important chapter because it shows Matilda's growing strength and confidence. She is no longer afraid to use her powers, and she is ready to stand up to the people who treat her badly. This chapter sets the stage for Matilda to continue using her abilities to bring justice and fairness to her world. Chapter 21. A New Home. In the last chapter, Matilda's life begins to change for the better. After everything she has gone through with her cruel parents, Matilda starts to feel hopeful. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, have always treated her badly. They never appreciated her intelligence and were very unkind. But now, things are starting to improve for Matilda. Miss Honey, her kind teacher, has been helping her. Miss Honey sees how special Matilda is and wants to help her escape from the bad situation at home. Miss Honey decides to visit Matilda's parents and talk to them about the way they treat their daughter. She hopes that they will understand and allow Matilda to live with her. When Miss Honey talks to Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, they are surprised. They do not understand why Miss Honey wants to help Matilda, but Miss Honey is determined. She explains that Matilda is a very smart and special girl, and she deserves to be treated better. After a lot of talking, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood finally agree to let Matilda live with Miss Honey. Matilda is very happy to leave her parents and start a new life in a place where she will be loved and cared for. In this chapter, Matilda finally finds a place where she belongs. She is no longer stuck with parents who do not care about her. With Miss Honey's help, Matilda starts a new chapter in her life where she will be appreciated for who she is. A New Home is an important chapter because it shows that Matilda's life is improving. She finally finds a loving home where she can be herself and be happy.